I'm 27 years old and still trying to fit in, check. $300. Oh! What is going on, guys? So today we're back with another deep dive, and today we're going over a Pokemon that I trash talked quite a bit a couple of cups ago. But to be fair, it was pretty underwhelming back then, and there's been some changes that actually make it fairly decent this go around. So we got to talk today about Suicune, who is a pure water type Pokemon maxing out at a whopping 2983. So pretty huge on the CP, but that's okay, because to get into the Great League, ideally you'd want a 1 on attack, 15 defense, 14 stamina at level 19, which does actually hit 1500 on the dot, which is great. But because Suicune is a legendary and we've basically only been able to get it from raiding and some legendary boxes or weekly research boxes or whatever, we're basically kind of stuck to this whole like raid CP egg research category, whatever you want to call it. So if you're not looking to trade Suicune because it is kind of hefty to begin with, you can go for an 11 on the attack, 14 defense, 15 stamina. That's actually going to be a pretty decent one. It actually is most optimal if you're going to go for the raid one, but you know, you can get better performance out of the 1, 15, 14 if you decide to go that route, but 11, 14, 15 will work just fine. It actually does at level 18 hit 1499, so pretty nice. So if we actually take our Suicune and put it up against all of the Ferocious Cup, we look at bulk and stat product, kind of figure out where we are. This is quite surprising. Even though you would think Suicune, pretty beefy stats, it's a legendary, blah blah blah. 5th in bulk, yeah. And then 4th in stat product, yeah. So pretty nice. And of course all of those numbers do derive basically from our base stats here with a 180 on attack, 235 on defense, and 225 on our stamina. So looking really nice. I'm actually pretty much digging Suicune at this point in the deep dive. So then, as we know, a lot of times that can either make or break us, but our moves are kind of the other piece to the pie that makes us whole. So let's actually take a look at our moves here. And there are quite a few moves to choose from. Hidden Power, Extrasensory, Snarl, and Ice Fang just in terms of our fast moves. But then we also have Hydro Pump, Bubble Beam, Water Pulse, and Ice Beam inside of the charge move area. So we have 8 different moves basically. Let's actually look at our fast moves here, with Hidden Power being the odd man out, of course. So depending on how you got your Suicune or whatever, like you're gonna have, you may have Hidden Power on it, and that's cool. But it really is gonna come down to which Hidden Power you have, and kind of depending on which one you have, if it's gonna help you out or not. So basically every Hidden Power that I looked at was kind of underwhelming, except for the electric type one. So the electric type Hidden Power actually does pretty well in certain matchups, but it still doesn't actually beat a lot of the matches that we would also beat if we ran a different move. So Hidden Power, while it's not gonna be the focus of this video, I will say that if you have a specific variant, the electric type one is actually really good, but the fighting type one I also found pretty interesting as well. If you have either one of those, hey, you might have something interesting on your hand that is going to be very surprising to your opponent, because they're not going to expect that. Guarantee it. But for what it's worth, 2.66 on the energy per turn for 3 damage per turn. Unless you have the water type variant of Hidden Power, you're not going to get stabbed, but if you do, it does get bumped up to 3.6 on the damage as well. So then we move on to Extrasensory at 3 1/3 energy per turn for 2 2/3 damage per turn. So 3.33 for 2.66. No stab because, you know, we're not psychic type. Snarl though, which recently did get reworked, to a 4.33 on the energy per turn for a 1.66 on the damage per turn. So it kind of sounds a little awkward because it's high in energy but low in damage, but also think like Mudshot, because it's pretty much going to be really similar to that, which is actually really, really cool. And then last but not least, we do have Ice Fang for 2.5 energy per turn. We do get 4 damage per turn, and that actually is a pretty solid freaking move. I really like Ice Fang, but unfortunately, from what I could figure out, it didn't really do a whole lot in this cup. Snarl is actually going to be the one that actually helps us the most. Even over any of the variant from Hidden Power, Snarl does amazing here. So Snarl with its insane energy per turn for measly damage per turn doesn't sound amazing, but it's not about the damage when it comes to Snarl. It's all about the energy getting to those charge moves, which actually, let's go ahead and talk about Hydro Pump, Bubble Beam, Water Pulse, and Ice Beam. Hydro Pump for 75 energy per turn at a 130 on the damage per turn at a 1.73 damage per energy ratio. After stab, it does get bumped up to 156, which does make it a 2.08, which is the most efficient move that we have, which is cool. Bubble Beam for 40 energy. Yeah, this one's the weird one, by the way. 25 damage. Holy cow. For 0.63 on the damage per energy ratio. After stab, since we are water, we do get a little bit of a buff up to 30 for a 0.75. Now it does have the debuff, the buff debuff kind of effect thing there as well, which if I'm not mistaken, it's lowering the attack. It does debuff the enemy one stage whenever we use Bubble Beam, so that's actually not too bad. You could actually do a pretty cool setup with that. Water Pulse for 60 energy, we get 70 damage at a 1.17 damage per energy ratio. After stab, it does get bumped up to 84, which is a 1.4 on the damage per energy ratio. Ice Beam for 55 energy, we get 90 damage at a 1.64. No stab, of course, since we are for some reason not ice type. So with that being said, the two charge moves that I found the most success with were going to be Hydro Pump and Bubble Beam. So I do think there's something to be said about Water Pulse, but here's the thing about Water Pulse. There are just better variants of Water Pulse out there. Water Pulse is kind of that like awkward move where it's kind of in the middle of where you would want to see your energy, but it's kind of on the low end of what you would want to see your damage. So it kind of like on certain Pokemon, it's kind of like one of their better options. So it looks like it's really good, but objectively looking at it, it's just kind of not. So we're actually just going to kind of avoid Water Pulse here. Ice Beam, while I do see some merits for possibly some coverage type items in certain teams, maybe Ice Beam could work out really well for your team if you are needing some more ice type damage. Like maybe you don't go with Alolan Ninetales or who's another ice type Pokemon? Alolan Sandslash. Let's say you just don't want to go with one of those for some reason. Ice Beam could actually work out really well to cover some of your weaknesses. So that actually sits really well. But for the main purposes of this video, I was going purely off win ratios. What do we win the most with? And that ends up being Hydro Pump and Bubble Beam. So for the sake of this video, we are going to go with Snarl, Hydro Pump, Bubble Beam. So up against the entire cup, starting out in the 0 versus 0 with our moveset, we actually hit a whopping 71.6%. So usually in the even shield scenarios, I like to talk about like maybe a 50%, because I wouldn't expect if both me and my opponent had the same amount of shields that I'd win majority of the time. But it just so turns out that Suicune does not like that rule. It actually likes to win 7 out of 10 times whenever you have 0 shields up against the entire cup, which is actually freaking nice. In the 2 versus 0, we actually have a 98.9. And PvPoke did something kind of weird on me here. It, in theory, should be more of like a 98.9 with 1 draw, and that draw being ourselves. But it ends up being a 98.9 with 1 loss, and it's to ourselves? Yeah, for some weird reason, PvPoke, it did this weird thing where if I gave the opponent Suicune charge move priority, it would end up winning with like 22 health, whereas if I gave myself charge move priority, it would still end up winning with 2 health. So it was kind of awkward. I tried to like play around in the sandbox mode to figure a little bit about that, but I just couldn't figure it out. So for what it's worth, it should, in theory, be 98.9, only tying up against yourself, but for whatever reason, it was 98.9 with a loss. So, moving on to our 0 versus 2, we actually end up with a 22.1%. I always preach in this area, 10% or nothing. 10% or nothing. Go home, get out, you're not worth it. a 22.1 is phenomenal. That is amazing. Not nearly as good as Alolan Ninetales was, but still amazing. Last but not least, we do end up in the 2v2, which again, breaking all the molds here, 88.4%. I'm looking at like 50% being like a 2 thumbs up for me, but 88.4 is smashing. Next, moving on to the meta, we actually start out with our 0 versus 0, which is a 44%, so kind of bringing it a little bit closer back to home. Not quite a 50%, but respectable at the 44. Next, in the 1v0, we actually have an 84%. Pretty respectable. I mean, we have a shield up, so we should expect to win a lot more of those. In the 0 versus 1, though, 40%. Yeah, so we actually do better up against the condensed meta when the opponent has a shield than we would against the entire cup. So I think that number is probably just a little inflated by the simulation nature of what I'm doing here, but I think that basically with that bubble beam and the ability to kind of like bait out some shields here or there, I think that does inflate that number a little bit, but still, that's pretty respectable at 40%. Last but not least, in the 1v1, we actually end up with a 60% clean. So definitely looking good for Suicune. I'm way more than impressed. You can color me impressed right now. Next, moving on to some matchups. Let's actually take that 1v1 scenario up against the entire meta, break that down, and kind of figure out what wins and what losses we had. So remember 60% here. Winning up against Torkoal, Nidoking, Lairon, Nidoqueen, Donphan with counter, Piloswine, Alolan Marowak, Alolan Sandslash, Donphan with charm, Delcatty, Granbull, Vaporeon, Alolan Ninetales, Umbreon, and Skuntank. So whoosh, that's actually pretty freaking good. Then, we do have a tie up against ourselves for what it's worth. For whatever reason, it ties now instead of in the entire cup scenario, whatever. We do lose up against Furret, Pachirisu, Shelgon, Alolan Raticate, Babero, Lickitung, Raichu, Raikou, and Minun. So there are some pretty big names there at the end of that list, which kind of moves us into the ripe and rotten section that I did coin last video. Thanks, I'm pretty proud of it. If we look at the right Pokemon, so basically the Pokemon that we want to carry along with us if we're using Suicune, things that I think kind of complement the Suicune pairing, things like Nidoking, Nidoqueen, Torkoal, and Alolan Marowak I think would actually be really well to pair alongside of Suicune, because ground types for resistance up against what is actually going to be beating us a whole ton is actually going to be really good. So all of those have some kind of affiliation with some ground type stuff. Alolan Marowak, not so much. I also don't want to forget Donphan here because, yes, Donphan. But basically, they all have some type of ground type move to help us like bat up against the electric types. But Alolan Marowak's kind of the odd one out. It just kind of has Bone Club, which I thought would be okay. But maybe not as much Alolan Marowak as the other guys, but definitely think about like what you want to take in alongside of Suicune to help counter those electric types, because it's going to be kind of important. Because in the Rodden section here, we actually have Minun and Pachirisu. So I only included these two. So Raikou is actually going to be one of those that if it catches you off guard or if it already has some energy stored up, it could be extremely potentially really bad. But if it's just like in a dead start, both Pokemon have full HP, 0 energy, like let's just, you lead with Raikou, I lead with Suicune, I'd actually feel pretty comfortable going up with Suicune here because we have so much more energy gain than he does. We can actually get off a Bubble Beam rather quickly and then get off a Hydro Pump to finish Raikou off, and he basically only gets one charge attack before that happens. So you do have to waste a shield to survive the Raikou, but it's not anywhere nearly as bad as if you were going up against Minun or Pachirisu. Those two are going to be the bane of your existence if you're Suicune, and it's just kind of how it goes because they're automatically going to be using some of their best moves, plus they're going to be super effective against you, so you just kind of end up having an uphill battle. Unfortunately, you don't really have too much to go up against them. Even if you were to have a hidden power that possibly does okay up against them, it still is really, really rough because they just, they're so good up against the Suicune. So with that being said, that's why I say Torkoal, Nidoking, Nidoqueen, Donphan, definitely going to be a fan of those. Get it? Up against the Minun and the Pachirisu there, because those are going to be a pretty big deal. So that is actually going to be it for Suicune, guys. Like I said, color me impressed, because a couple of months ago, if you told me that Suicune was going to be freaking in a meta, like a condensed meta for a cup, I'd have laughed at you. I'd have told you that you were crazy. But it's possible. I think Suicune is actually really freaking good this month. I definitely think that you should probably have one in your back pocket ready to go for a tournament. If you don't end up going with it, that's going to be more up to you, but I definitely think that it's worth having ready if you end up wanting to use it. So that's my verdict. That's all I've got for today. And scene. Thank you guys so much for watching. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you could do that, but if you don't, you could be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below about the video. I do highly appreciate you guys watching. If you guys want to support me in any way, there are several links down in the description for Patreon, joining the community here on YouTube, or even just directly PayPal if that's your thing. I greatly appreciate everyone's name that's on screen, as you guys have showed some sort of support outside of just viewing the videos, and I thank you guys. You don't understand from the bottom of my heart. So until our next video, guys, I will catch you then.